Christmas lights twinkling on quiet suburban streets, laughter echoing from living rooms, wrapping paper piled high. December 24th, 2010, should have been a night of magic for 12-year-old Jonathan Foster. Instead, it became a nightmare etched into true crime history. He stepped outside his Houston home to run a simple errand and vanished. What happened next wasn't just murder. It was a horror so calculated, so sadistic, that even hardened detectives struggled to stomach the details. Jonathan's body was found mutilated by an acetylene torch, a tool meant for welding metal, not extinguishing a child's life. But here's the question that claws at the darkest corners of this case. When investigators stared into Mona Wilson's eyes, the woman convicted of this unspeakable crime, what did they see? A first-time killer or a predator who'd honed her cruelty in silence for years? Because this wasn't the work of a novice. The precision, the coldness, the way she left no room for mistakes, no traces of evidence, just ashes and unanswered questions. So tonight, we're not just retracing Jonathan's tragedy, we're diving into the shadows behind it. Was Mona Wilson a one-time monster, or a ghost who'd been haunting the outskirts of justice long before Jonathan's name hit the headlines? Stick around. The truth is darker than you think. Christmas Eve in Houston. A crisp winter night. Families unpacking gifts. Ovens humming with pies. Jonathan Foster, a quiet boy with a love for video games, told his family he'd be right back, just heading to a neighbor's house. A 5-minute walk. He never returned. Hours ticked by. The glow of holiday lights turned ominous. His mother, Cindy, paced the streets, screaming his name. Police combed the neighborhood, but there were no leads, no ransom calls, just silence. Then, a break. A neighbor reported seeing a woman lurking near the Fosters' home that night. A woman named Mona Wilson. She lived nearby, in a cluttered trailer. When police knocked on her door, she shrugged, denied everything, but her eyes, they didn't. Days later, investigators made a grisly discovery in a remote wooded area. Jonathan's body. What was left of it? Mona had used an acetylene torch, a tool that burns at over 3,000 degrees, to torture him, to erase him. The flames melted flesh, seared bone. But this wasn't rage. It was calculation. No screams were reported. No struggle. She'd done it quietly, methodically, like she'd done it before. The evidence was ash, a boy reduced to fragments, a family left with nothing but a hollow grave, and a killer who gave no answers, only a chilling smirk at her trial. Jonathan's case was closed, but for one detective, the nightmare was just beginning. Mona Wilson wasn't a mastermind. She wasn't a notorious criminal. In fact, before Jonathan's murder, she was a ghost, a shadow drifting through life. She floated between Texas, Arizona, Louisiana, no fixed address, no real job. She took odd work as a welder, a cleaner, a babysitter. But those who crossed her path saw cracks in the facade. Neighbors called her volatile. Friends used words like unhinged. One roommate said she'd stare into campfires for hours, whispering to herself, like the flames were speaking to her. They said, but fire wasn't just an obsession. It became her weapon. Police dug into her past and found nothing. No birth certificate, no family ties. She used aliases, burned old IDs, a drifter with no roots. No history, just a trail of rumors. In Arizona, a teenage girl vanished near a motel where Mona worked. In Louisiana, a young mother went missing after an argument with a woman matching her description. Coincidences? Or clues? Mona left no evidence. No confessions. Just questions. How many towns did she pass through? How many lives did she brush up against? And how many of those lives simply ended? By the time Houston detectives pieced together her name, Mona had already perfected the art of disappearance. Because when you live in the shadows, it's easy to make others vanish. 2. Most killers slip up. They leave a fingerprint, a stray hair, a witness. But Mona Wilson? She left nothing but smoke. For most detectives, Jonathan's case ended when she was sentenced to life in prison. But for one investigator, a veteran homicide detective with 20 years on the job, something didn't sit right. He'd seen crimes of passion, crimes of rage. But this was different. The way Mona used that acetylene torch, it wasn't chaotic. It wasn't messy. It was clinical, like she knew exactly how to destroy a body, how to leave no trace. You don't get that good on your first try. He'd later say. So he kept digging. He started with Mona's timeline. For years, she'd drifted across the South, Texas, Arizona, Louisiana, tiny towns, forgotten highways. And in every state she passed through, he found something chilling: missing persons reports. Young women, teenagers, single mothers, all vanished under hazy circumstances, all unsolved. In 2007, 3 years before Jonathan's murder, Mona lived in Phoenix. That same year, 15-year-old Jessica Morales disappeared after walking home from a friend's house. Her body was never found. In 2009, she worked at a truck stop in Baton Rouge. Months later, 22-year-old Lydia DuPont, a waitress at a diner next door, left for her night shift and never arrived. No witnesses, no suspects, just empty spaces where people once stood. But the detective noticed something else. These weren't random disappearances. The victims were all vulnerable. People who wouldn't be missed immediately. People whose cases might gather dust. And then there was the fire. In Jessica's case, a charred backpack was found in the desert. In Lydia's, a burned-out car abandoned in a swamp. Fire, Mona's signature, was there from the start. But how do you prove a killer's pattern when the evidence is ash? The detective tracked down every name, every case file. He mapped Mona's movements against the disappearances. The overlap was undeniable. She'd arrive in a town, and someone would vanish. She'd leave, and the trail would go cold. Yet without bodies, without physical proof, the cases stayed closed. He interviewed her old neighbors. One recalled Mona babysitting kids in Arizona, kids who later had nightmares about her. Another mentioned a storage unit she'd rented, filled with welding tools and a weird smell. But by the time the detective searched it, the unit was empty. Even her prison interviews revealed nothing. Mona smirked when asked about other victims. "Prove it," she'd say. But the detective didn't need proof to know. He'd spent years studying killers, the ones who start small, the ones who practice. And Mona, she fit the profile. She didn't wake up one day and decide to torture a child with a torch. He said, that kind of evil, it takes time to perfect. So why did the system ignore him? Because without bodies, there are no crimes. Without crimes, there's no justice. Mona knew that. She preyed on the invisible, the forgotten, the ones society wouldn't fight for. But the detective fought. He filed petitions, reopened cold cases, pleaded with families to share details they'd buried. And piece by piece, he built a portrait of a predator who'd spent years lurking in the margins, a predator who treated human lives like kindling, burning them away until nothing remained. Yet for all his work, the truth remains trapped in the shadows. Jessica, Lydia, dozens of other names lost to time. Were they Mona's victims? Did she silence them the way she silenced Jonathan? We'll never know. But the detective's theory haunts this case. Jonathan Foster wasn't the beginning. He was the end, the tragic finale of a monster's secret career. And if he's right, then somewhere out there, in the deserts and swamps Mona once called home, there are families who still don't know their loved ones were murdered by a woman the world barely noticed, until it was too late. Jessica Morales loved horses. She'd spend weekends at a ranch outside Phoenix, brushing their manis, saving up cash from her part-time job to buy riding lessons. Then, in 2007, she left her best friend's house after a sleepover, a 10-minute walk home. She never made it. Her parents plastered the city with flyers. Cops searched ditches, deserts. But Jessica? She was just gone, until a detective in Houston, 1,000 miles away, noticed something. The year Jessica vanished, Mona Wilson was living in Phoenix, working at a motel near that ranch. Coincidence? Maybe. But then there's Lydia DuPont, a 22-year-old single mother in Louisiana. She waitressed at a diner, saved every tip to buy her toddler son a swing set. One night in 2009, she kissed her boy goodbye, told her mom she'd be back after her shift. Her car was found a week later in a bayou, scorched black. No fingerprints, no Lydia. And Mona Wilson? She'd been working at a truck stop next to that diner, quit her job the day after Lydia disappeared. These aren't ghost stories. These are real people, real families, and real gaps in the timeline of Mona Wilson's life that match their vanishings. But here's the problem: no bodies, no DNA, no proof, just whispers. So what do we do with these gaps? These empty spaces where answers should be? Jessica's case file collects dust in Arizona. Lydia's photo fades on a forgotten missing persons website. Their families still wait, still wonder, still ache. And then there's Mona, a woman who drifted through their towns like a storm cloud, a woman with a history of obsession with fire, a woman who, years later, would torture a child with a tool that turns flesh to ash. But was Jonathan Foster her first? Or her last? The math is grim. Serial killers often start with victims society overlooks: runaways, sex workers, the poor, people whose disappearances don't make headlines, people whose cases get labeled low priority. Mona didn't target CEOs or celebrities. She drifted through communities where people could vanish without sirens, where questions could die quietly. Think about it. How easy would it be for someone like Mona, a nobody, a ghost, to offer a ride to a tired waitress? To befriend a lonely teenager? To promise a struggling mom a better job? And how easy would it be for those victims to dissolve into thin air? Their cases written off as bad choices or dead ends. The detective believed this was Mona's playbook. Not chaos. Strategy. She didn't hunt in the light. She lurked in the margins, where the cracks are wider, where the lost stay lost. But without bodies, can we ever call her a serial killer? Can we accuse her of crimes that exist only in theory? The law says no. The courts say no. But the families? They don't get closure. They don't get graves to visit. They get a lifetime of maybes. Maybe Jessica ran away. Maybe Lydia's ex-boyfriend snapped. Maybe. Maybe. But maybe isn't justice. And here's the darkest twist. Mona knew this. She died in prison in 2021, never uttering a word about other victims. She took the truth with her. If there were others, they're not just dead, they're erased, unmourned, unacknowledged. So what's worse? A monster who kills once, or a monster who learns how to vanish her crimes completely? The answer depends on who you ask. For Jonathan's family, there's a villain behind bars. For Jessica's parents? For Lydia's son? There's only a shadow, a name in an old police report, a woman who might have been a killer, or just a bad memory. But this isn't just about Mona Wilson. It's about all the monsters we never see, the ones who don't leave trails, the ones who exploit our blind spots, the gaps in our attention, our resources, our empathy. How many Jessicas and Lydias are out there? How many killers walk free? Not because they're clever, but because we stop looking too soon. Mona's story forces us to stare into that void, to wonder, is evil only what we can see, or is it the horrors we never bother to uncover? Jonathan Foster's grave sits in a Houston cemetery, a small stone etched with dates too close together. His family visits often. They leave toys, letters, flowers, but what they can't leave there? Answers. Because even with Mona Wilson behind bars, the questions gnaw. Was their son the only one, or just the only one found? Cindy, Jonathan's mother, once said in an interview, "I need to know if she hurt others. If there are families out there like us, stuck in the dark, I need to tell them it wasn't their fault." But how do you find closure when the truth is ash? This case isn't just about one boy. It's about a terrifying reality. Some killers don't just take lives. They erase them. And when a victim vanishes without a trace, their story dies twice, once in flesh, once in memory. Think about Jessica Morales' parents. They still call Phoenix detectives every year on her birthday. Any updates? Always the same answer. No. Or Lydia DuPont's son. He's a teenager now. He asks his grandma why his mother's photo is stuck in 2009. She doesn't know how to tell him it's because the world stopped looking. These aren't cold cases. They're open wounds. But here's what's worse. If Mona did kill them, she didn't just steal their lives. She stole their legacies. No vigils. No headlines. No justice. Just silence. And silence is where monsters thrive. We like to believe evil announces itself, that killers slip up, that the system works. But Mona's story whispers a darker truth. The most dangerous predators aren't the ones who leave a mess. They're the ones who learn to clean it up. How many others are out there? How many killers hide behind life's chaos, behind poverty, bureaucracy, society's short attention span? How many victims are written off as runaways or bad decisions because we don't want to dig deeper? Mona's case forces us to confront our own complicity. Every time we click off a missing persons post because it's too depressing. Every time we assume a cold case is hopeless. Every time we think, someone else will care. But what if no one does? Jonathan's family fights because they have a grave to fight for. But Jessica's parents? Lydia's son? They're chasing ghosts. And ghosts don't get justice. So why does this matter? Because monsters like Mona don't just exist in the past. They're here. Now. In every town. On every highway. They're the quiet neighbors. The unassuming coworkers. The ones we'd never suspect, because we've already decided who a killer should look like. Mona Wilson died in her prison cell in 2021. No final words. No confession. Just a name on a death certificate. But her legacy isn't just the evil she did. It's the evil we let her get away with. So I'll leave you with this. The next time you hear about a missing person, someone from the wrong side of town, someone with a troubled past, someone the world shrugs at, ask yourself, what if we're wrong? What if they weren't careless, but hunted? What if their story isn't over, just buried? And what if the monster who took them isn't a shadowy stranger, but someone hiding in plain sight, smiling as we scroll right past their victim's face on our screens? Monsters don't always roar. Sometimes, they fade away with a whisper. On March 15th, 2021, Mona Wilson died in a Texas prison cell. No last words. No deathbed confession. Just a silent exit. As though she'd never been there at all. The state cremated her remains. No family claimed them. No one mourned. But here's the truth about evil. It doesn't die when the killer does. Jonathan Foster's case is closed. His killer is gone. But the shadows she cast? They stretch far beyond that Houston cemetery. Because when a predator like Mona vanishes, she doesn't take just her secrets to the grave, she takes theirs. 2. The names we'll never know. The screams we'll never hear. Jessica Morales' parents still wait for a phone call that will never come. Lydia DuPont's son still stares at old photos, wondering why his mother's smile is frozen in time. And somewhere out there, in the towns Mona passed through like a plague, there are empty chairs at dinner tables, missing faces in family portraits, birthdays celebrated at grave sites, or worse, at nowhere at all. We tell ourselves justice was served, that the bad guy lost. But justice isn't just punishment. It's answers. It's truth. And without those, the wound never heals, it just festers. Mona's story isn't a tragedy. It's a warning that the most dangerous killers aren't the ones who crave attention. They're the ones who hide in life's blind spots, in the flicker of a campfire, in the hum of a highway, in the gaps between missing and forgotten. So tonight, as you turn off the lights and let this story fade from your mind, ask yourself one last question. How many Monas are out there right now? How many quiet, unremarkable souls are drifting through the world, leaving nothing but silence in their wake? And how many of us are already looking the other way,